All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live. We are live. This is a bit impromptu for me. I didn't actually schedule this thing out. I decided, hey, I'm going to go live and we're going to talk about headlines because there's a fair bit of stuff to talk about, and I figured that that would be the thing to do. So we'll go ahead and do it. All right, we've got several entertainment headlines, so I guess we'll go over some of those first. But before we do, I want to go over something that happened just recently. In fact, just yesterday, which is this whole, I'm not going to show any of the video, but this whole stabbing that took place in Brooklyn. Horror video shows social justice activist stabbed to death in Democrat-run New York. There's now surveillance video of 32-year-old social justice activist Ryan Carson being stabbed to death in Democrat-run New York. Here's what I will say about this whole incident. People are trying to make a big deal about the fact that people are saying this is politically motivated, or that this is not politically motivated, but the discussion is politically motivated surrounding this. This is a horrible tragedy. This shouldn't have happened. But what people are pointing out is that the person who died was an advocate for the types of policies that allow this to happen. And he's a victim, therefore he is a victim of the policies that he advocated for, and sadly, he will never learn from that. And I happen to agree with that. Because he is advocating for being soft on crime. He is advocating for being soft on black people, young black youth who commit these types of things. Not everybody, of course, but the people within these areas. And who knows what this kid's problem was. He was kicking bikes, he was doing whatever. He was advocating for less punishment for them. For them to get slapped on the wrist and let out so that they can hurt more people. That is the lesson that is to be taken away from this, regardless of where you stand. Don't advocate for policies that allow for people to get hurt and killed. Nobody is celebrating this. This is not being celebrated. This is something that is terrible. It should never happen. It should never have had to happen. All of the circumstances leading up to this should have been avoided. These two should have went the other way. They should have ignored this guy, but they went in his direction, either because they were trying to go where they were trying to go. Some people have suggested they might have been high on something. Who honestly knows? An entire investigation is taking place, and eventually time will tell what happens. But he was a major advocate for BLM. He was a major advocate for all of those collective causes. And people are pointing out that those causes advocate for this guy who stabbed him to get a lighter sentence. And if he gets a lighter sentence, he'll get what he voted for. And that is truly... that's tragic. It's almost poetic. But moving on from that, we'll go ahead and exit out of that. We're here on Bounding into Comics to talk about entertainment news. Oh boy, there is so much. This one is new. I haven't read this yet. Rumor, Hasbro to choose not to create Ahsoka toys due to lack of demand. Nevertheless, he added, apparently Hasbro was given the opportunity to do a wait-and-see model with Ahsoka, and they are waiting, and they are not seeing, because I'm told you can pretty much count on nothing more coming out for the Christmas season. He also shared, my understanding there are Black Series action figures for Ahsoka, but they are an extremely limited run. That's what one of our sources is telling us. Extremely limited. Bare minimum run. And it is essentially to satisfy collectors, but there's no demand in terms of the young demographic. There's an O missing from this. I don't know who did this article, but it was John. So he missed an O. No big deal. Indeed, there are numerous Black Series figures available to purchase on the Hasbro Plus website, including Sabrine Wren, Hera Sidilut, I can't pronounce that, Chopper, The Ghost, Marok, Professor Huang. These all sound like butchered Asian names. I hope they understand that's not what Star Wars is. You don't just make names that sound Asian and say that that's Star Wars. Balin Skull, Morgan Elsbeth, Chopper again, and a Sabrine Wren helmet. While WDW Pro notes this is indeed a rumor, he did share searches for some of the more prominent characters in the Disney Plus Ahsoka series, and there are not many toys on the Shop Hasbro website. In fact, there's only one Ahsoka collectible from the series as retailing for $30, $29.99. It's the Star Wars Galactic Action Ahsoka Tano. Can I be fair? I like the way she looked in the animated Clone Wars and Rebels better than this. Just saying. I don't like her live action look. I don't care for it. I don't think this character should have ever been made live action. It doesn't make any sense, but Disney Star Wars gonna Disney Star Wars. Searches for other characters on the Shop Hasbro website do not populate any returns. The only return for Thrawn is a Star Wars The Black Series archive Grand Admiral Thrawn figure from Star Wars Rebels. There are no returns for Sabine Wren, Ezra Bridger, Balin Skoll, Shin Hati, Morgan Elsbeth, or Hera Syndulla. That's my best trying to butcher my way through that. This latest rumor comes after a previous one of WDW Pro and his sources that allege that Star Wars toy sales were down 65%. World Class BS has been covering a lot of how the Star Wars toys have been doing. He's been going into shops and showcasing how full the shelves are. He's been doing this for years, so I'm not at all surprised. Pro detailed in the middle of September, according to the source, Disney has experienced a significant decrease in their retail space within the top non-closeout retailers in the U.S. Now, this is not just Star Wars. This is everything Disney, losing nearly 40% of their retail. Obviously, their politicking has had an effect on their sales. This decrease affects all sections except baby and preschool categories. He continued, Disney expanded its retail space when it acquired Marvel and Star Wars due to the increased appeal to boys. However, the appeal to boys is largely gone, and thus the retail has shrunk for Disney by 40%. All right, I'm not going to go over this anymore because this is kind of boring. Just to say that there's no demand for Ahsoka toys, it's pretty much obvious. It's just, who cares? I have been a Star Wars fan since, I was 7, maybe 6, maybe earlier. Since I was very young, I started to watch the Star Wars trilogy. Our neighbors had it, and so we would borrow it from them. Then I bought my own box set of the Star Wars trilogy, which I still have on VHS. I need to get those converted somehow. And I also have the original trilogy on DVD. I have the original DVDs of the prequels. I loved Star Wars. I played Star Wars video games. I read different Star Wars books. I never read any of the novels, because I wasn't a novel reader. But, and a new article popped up, so we'll have something to read later. But it is what it is. It's Disney Star Wars, and you either really love Disney Star Wars or you don't. And I'm one of those people who just doesn't like Disney Star Wars. I think Disney Star Wars is terrible. I think it's awful. I saw The Force Awakens, and I hated it. And the weird thing about The Force Awakens was I wasn't willing to admit that I hated it when I walked out of the theater. When I walked out of the theater, I said to myself, okay, this was different. Something isn't sitting right with me, but I don't know that I hate it. And then as time went on, I was like, yeah, I actually hate it. I didn't like it. I was in my local video game shop, and I was talking to them about it, and I said, I walked away not being sure how I felt about Star Wars, about the Force Awakens. And they said, well, that pretty much means you don't like it. And I said, you might be right. You might be right. I think I'm overthinking this, because I have a tendency to overthink everything. Welcome to Planet Earth in 2023, and many, many people. Sadly, there's not enough people who overthink in creative circles, but it is what it is. And unfortunately, there's not enough people who overthink in Hollywood. Alright, so what else do we have? Gail Simone's top 5. Oh, gosh. Anything Gail Simone. She has caused so much trouble within all of these circles. Within comic book circles, particularly. Gail Simone's top 5 pet peeves of comics offer a stern warning to a failing industry. Increasingly, the comic industry is seeing professionals, retailers, and fans grumble about the collapse of mainstream comics. From Mark Millar taking on Thinking Critical, to IDW talking on Thinking Critical, to IDW posting record losses, almost everybody has an opinion, including Gail Simone, who talked about her 5 biggest pet peeves of the industry in a Facebook group this week. Simone's critiques of the industries are pretty standard for what's been spoken of by the creatives. Alright, so here's her list on Facebook. Number 1, not making sure veteran pros have work if they want it. Well, Gail, you kicked out a good portion of them. Why don't you give EVS a call, or Chuck Dixon? Or, any of the other pros that they've kicked out. They've kicked them out because of ideology, so it is what it is. Not respecting the stories that came before. Interesting coming from her. Very interesting. Not allowing the artist room to contribute. Well, see, here's the thing about that. Sometimes the artist can contribute, but other times they can't because they're not writers. If the artists have writing experience and have actually written books before, that makes sense. But the artists and writers should be working hand in hand in general to make it come to life. But when it comes to the overall story, I think their contributions should be limited to what they can actually contribute and what they feel comfortable contributing. So, number 4, price point. Well, everything is getting more expensive, so tough luck there. That's the economy that people apparently wanted. Number 5, lack of distribution options. That's with the whole diamond thing. Let's take a look into what she said and break her points down. Number 1, not making sure veteran pros have work if they want it. The comic industry is notorious for ageism being one of its worst problems. Even Grant Morrison has lamented that he's aged out of being able to write for mainstream comics in recent years. Mark Millar has also suggested in order to generate hype for storylines, bringing back seasoned veterans with followings is a crucial thing Marvel and DC have to do. For now, veteran artists find better places in independent homes like Comicsgate than they do finding work for these publishers. And that's the thing that she doesn't mention. Independents are doing great. A lot of these people, even if they were asked to come back to mainstream comics, they won't do it because they have to submit to a system that already was flawed before the whole Comicsgate, before the Iron Age, before any of the independent stuff happened. There were already problems within the comic book industry taking place that made a lot of these people not want to come back. Oh, this looks cool. The Ghosts of Matacumbe Key. Compass Comics. Covered by Graham Nolan. Ah. That's interesting. I gotta really start getting some more independent comics. Number 2, not respecting the stories that came before. This is probably the most controversial of Simone's opinions listed, as it's been the reason so many have been canceled and labeled, quote, bigots by the extreme left in the industry, including Gail Simone. Much of the lack of respect for the characters comes from replacing characters with race and gender-swapped counterparts and forcing beloved characters to be marred with LGBTQ fetishes. These changes have ruined multiple characters, and reviewers such as Richard C. Meyer have come under savage attacks for saying much of the same point. Yeah, see, he would buy comics and he would review them point by point, and they would go after him non-stop. They would just absolutely tear him down. So, I'm absolutely not surprised by that. Number 3, not allowing the artist room to contribute. Increasingly, the big companies have been outsourcing their work to foreign studios on the art. This has trained writers to be very specific in what they want because, with English as a second language, they can't risk an artist taking liberties when working with a competent artist who understands comics. However, this stylistic trend can be a detriment, as a good artist can bring a lot to a comic script if allowed breathing room. Ooh, this is rough. My Sister Suprema, Arcaven Comics. I don't know that this is rough. This is just different. This is like a manga style. My Sister Suprema, Arcaven Comics. I thought this was an example of something going on at Marvel or DC, and I was about to be like, oh, this is rough, but I don't know. At first glance, it looks kind of... I don't know what style they're going for here. This isn't... I don't know. I'd have to actually see the book. But this looks weird. My Sister Suprema. I've heard Arcaven has been putting out some really good stuff. Number 4, price point. Many comics on shelves are now showing introductory prices of $4.95, $5.99, or even $7.99 in the case of Ultimate Invasion 1. Wow. This increasingly makes it difficult for a reader to check something interesting out of the stands because it makes the amount more than an impulse buy. If anything, the number 1 issue should be discounted in order to try to get readers on for a story. Otherwise, why would they wait for trade or go find a cheaper form of entertainment? Alterna Comics has done wonders in this regard by using newsprint to create cheap entry points for readers. Other books like King Cryptid by Peter Simeti. Peter Simeti being the guy who founded Alterna, I believe. And that looks gorgeous. Wow. $1.99? Man, I gotta check a lot of this stuff out. I just don't... And part of it is that I don't have a lot of space, so I want to invest in more digital stuff, but a lot of these guys aren't doing digital. And if I really like a book, if they do a graphic novel format, then I'd like to get the graphic novel, but a lot of them just aren't doing graphic novels. But this looks cool. If you're listening in podcast form, this is a cover for King Cryptid from Alterna Comics. You'll have to Google it. It looks awesome. Number 5, lack of distribution option. This point speaks to both the physical and digital media. For physical, comics have been relegated to local shops for years, making it a place where someone has to know want comics to go. I don't quite understand this sentence. Let me read that again. This point speaks to both the physical and digital media. For physical, comics have been relegated to local shops for years, making it a place where someone has to know they want comics to go. I still don't get it. Somebody who knows what comics they want to go, maybe? I don't know. They used to be in places like grocery stores, gas stations, and places where people could simply find books. Online is no better, as Amazon offers about the only viable digital option off the direct platforms of the companies themselves. Comic companies need to open up other avenues and stop being so myopic. Here's the thing. They tried this. The DC app, the Marvel app, and Amazon themselves with Comixology, which they recently closed. They tried digital marketplaces, and it didn't work. People weren't downloading them because comics are still stigmatized to this day as being the nerdiest of nerdy things. They haven't taken on the same thing as video games and tabletop games where there's been a resurgence or there's been an upsurge in mainstream popularity. People, the comics industry thought that with all of the live action superhero movies that they were going to have just multiple sales and increase and people getting it. No. Because people are doing the same thing they do with books. Why read the book when I can watch the movie? That's how they were treating it, and that's how they were always going to treat it. That mentality was completely misplaced. So, I agree with this, but it doesn't work. And I want digital distribution because, again, I'm a guy who, I've got so much junk. I've got so many video games. I've got so many old things that I have. I don't have a lot of room for anything other than major graphic novels. I really don't. I've got a lot of regular books. And so I'm trying to sort of cut back on all of my stuff because it does just collect dust. I tend to not reread a lot of my books and comics and every once in a great while if I get the need to, but it makes a mess and, you know, it is what it is. So there's that whole element. And then I think digitally, they don't advertise. When I was growing up, I never saw a single advertisement for a single comic book. Ever. I never saw an advertisement for my local comic book store. I never saw an advertisement for my local comic books. This is late 90s, early 2000s, by the way. I never saw a single advertisement for any comics-related anything. Hey, Jessica Kasumi in chat, YOLO. Howdy. But, never saw a single advertisement for a single comic book ever. And I think that's the biggest problem with the comic book industry is they never advertised. I would have gotten into comic books as a kid had they advertised, but they don't. They don't advertise. And that is a major, major problem. Overall, Simone made good points with her pet peeves, and all these could be thought of as warnings to the comic industry as a whole. They are in trouble. They need to up their game in several regards. Yeah, unironically, I agree with a lot of these points, but a lot of these points are self-inflicted in terms of the comic book industry having issues. They created a lot of their own issues, no pun intended. Even the most well-guarded caravans. Ah, this is neat. This is very neat. There's a lot of stuff here. A lot of really good illustration. Yeah, Chuck Dixon's doing a lot. He doesn't necessarily need to be in the mainstream to do everything that he's doing. The Siege of the Black Citadel. Was I saying Cathedral earlier? Oh, no, I was talking about the Caravan of the Damned. That's pretty cool. I like or light would be the undoing of life as you understand it. But yet we've had years of the dark side being dominant leading up to... I believe leading up to the prequels, the dark side was fairly... Or no, the light side was fairly dominant. I'm getting it reversed. The dark side was largely hidden. They couldn't sense it out. Which was... They couldn't sense the Emperor and his apprentice because they were so hidden. They knew he was there, but he was so hidden that they couldn't sense it. So I don't get this line of reasoning at all. After Anakin completes a test taming the father's children, he informs him, "But this is yours. It has been foretold. The chosen one will remain to keep my children in balance." This idea about the balance would be reinforced in the subsequent episode, Altar of the Mortis, where the son appears to Anakin in a vision. He instructs how simple you make it. And yeah, they're kind of recapping the episode. I don't want to really do that. George Lucas made it abundantly clear that the balance is in the... However, George Lucas made it abundantly clear that the balance in the Force is suppression of the dark side. Back in 2010, Lucas discussed the Force during a writers' meeting for Star Wars: The Clone Wars. If advertising wasn't so stupidly expensive, imagine just how many local products could find a massive audience. Exactly. That is a great point. And that's part of the problem is advertising budgets are out of control. Back in the day, they used to do so much with advertising. And you don't need to do anything fancy with comics. You just need to have a splash screen, maybe some good music, have a good artist make a splash screen, introducing the adventures of so-and-so. Do a little animatic if you want to spend a little bit more money. Independent people advertise it all the time. But they don't, I don't know. They're weird about it. I'm trying to get to where he talks about what Lucas is saying. Lucas then elaborated, obviously, the Sith are unhappy because they never get enough of anything they want. Mostly their selfishness centers around power and control, and the struggle is to be always able to let go of all that stuff. And that's the problem with Anakin, ultimately, is that you're allowed to love people, but you're not allowed to possess them. And what he did is that he fell in love and then married her, and then he became jealous, and he saw in his visions that she was going to die, and he couldn't stand losing her. So in order not to lose her, he made a pact with the devil to be able to become all powerful. But of course, when he did that, she didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore, so he lost her. Once you are powerful, being able to bring her back from the dead, well, if I can do that, I can be emperor of the universe, and I can get rid of the emperor, or I can do anything. I can make anything the way I want it, and once you do that, you'll never be satiated, Lucas said. That's a pretty good format. You're always going to be consumed by this driving desire to have more stuff and be afraid that others are going to take it away from you. And of course they are because every time you get two Sith together, you have the master, you have the apprentice, and the apprentice is always trying to recruit another apprentice to join with him to kill the master. Yeah, I like that outline quite a bit. Or do what Amtrak did in the 80s and 90s and use actual transfer. Wait a second. Hold on just a minute here. Well, Or do what Amtrak did in the 80s and 90s and use actual trains to show just how majestic travel by train was. Just shoot some B-roll to accompany the interior shots of the creative slogan. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, we need more. We definitely need more general advertisement, just across the spectrum, but not like they're doing it today. Today they spend way too much money and it has no substance, and it's absolutely ridiculous. So I absolutely agree with that. You need way more. Okay, so the only way to overcome the dark side is through discipline. The dark side is pleasure, biological and temporary and easy to achieve. Yeah, the dark side is basically, he's painting it like original sin, like in the Bible. But they're painting it as just somebody who's misunderstood. It's not actually. They're trying to make it so that the dark side isn't evil, and that's not what Lucas set up. And I think that's where they're starting to fail. They're trying to deconstruct everything that Lucas already established that Star Wars fans are already okay with. You can't do that. You can't do that and keep fans. That's just the writer's room doing what they want, not submitting to what is already established. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I had a weird pause earlier. I was just trying to check and see what some of my streaming settings were, because there were a couple of hiccups, but should be all good now. All right. Robin Hood director melts down over series negative reception, claims show is being review bombed by racists. More of that. I saw Heel versus Babyface's video on that. That was interesting to say the least. But that show is just going to come and gone. I think I'm just going to ignore that whole thing. That should have never been made. CD Projekt Red partners with Anonymous Content to develop Cyberpunk 2077 live action project. Huh. A live-action Cyberpunk 2077, isn't that basically Blade Runner? Interesting. Alright. Let's see, is there anything else? Comic shop behind Free Comic Book Day signals it might be shutting down soon. Ooh, this isn't good. The comic shop behind Free Comic Book Day appeared to signal it'll be shutting its doors in the near future. Flying Colors Comics, which is operated by Joe Field, the creator of Free Comic Book Day, appeared to announce it will be shutting down following its 35th anniversary event this upcoming weekend. That's not good. 2000 AD. Best of 2000 AD. Oh, okay, so that's like the Judge Dredd type. Gotcha. In a Facebook post, the comic shop, which is located in Concord, California, invited customers to stop by the store for its upcoming 35th anniversary event on October 7th, where they will be serving Hulk Smash Brownies, giving away a commemorative exclusive art print, and hosting Jeff Bonavert for a signing. Following this, the post states, honestly, and maybe a bit sadly, there aren't likely any more milestone anniversaries for this shop in this location. So this photo of the shop at night is maybe a little reflective of the state that things are currently. However, Field did not go into any other details, cutting the topic off, writing, enough of that for now, though. That's sad. But that's where we're at. And too much obnoxious yelling, a good example of a comic book shop, have the owner of the store stand in front of the store, shoot some B-roll of a typical business day, and mention what they have. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea at all. If indeed Flying Color Comics is announcing its closing, as the post seems to imply, it's the second biggest store to close down in as many months. I was at my local comic book store, and they seem to be okay. They're a big store, but there was no one there. There was nobody there. There didn't seem to be anybody getting stuff from pull lists. They had plenty of stuff stacking up. It wasn't good. I mean, this industry is not in a good place because they've just sacrificed so much to do what they want to do as opposed to what the fans want to do. And to what the fans want to read. And to what people want to read. And it's just... the independent scene is doing fine, but these massive, these massive pushes for ideology, these massive pushes for rewriting and reestablishing characters, race swapping, gender swapping, everything else in between, just rearranging things as opposed to creating new characters. Everything is just melting down in this industry, and people are complaining about all sorts of problems. They need to fix their issues. They really need to fix their issues, no pun intended, and they're not doing that. They're not devoting to that. They're doubling and tripling down on decisions that they've made. And because they continue to do that, they're just causing more and more problems. It's just... I don't know. I honestly don't know. And it's very sad. It's very sad. Sacrifice quality and talent for what the woke Twitter crowd want. Sorry, Tim Pool had to borrow your quote. Well, yeah, but that's exactly the problem. They're sacrificing for an audience that isn't paying for their stuff. Nobody is paying for what is going on in comic books today because they've seen it and they've decided we don't agree with it. So, I mean, what are they expecting? And then whenever somebody points that out, oh, you're a horrible individual. Why? Because we're pointing out how business works, that you have to actually cater to your customers even if you don't support them ideologically. That's how business is. You don't look at somebody when you do business and look at their politics, look at whatever it is about them and say, I'm not going to serve them. You just do business with them. You take their money. You take their money and run. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, look at this. Tom King's staying connected. I'm having... okay, there we go. Staying connected. I'm having... okay, there we go. Reconnect successful. I don't know what's happening here. I think it's because it tried to pop up some video. But regardless, it's just ridiculous that we have reached this point where comics are more concerned about dividing people than they are about telling heroic stories that literally everybody can enjoy. Literally everybody. Doesn't matter what your background. You can enjoy a good comic book hero story. This is my philosophy. Keep your politics to yourself when doing business. We don't have to agree, but we should respect each other as human beings. Exactly. That is common sense among human beings. You don't have to agree with somebody perfectly. I disagree with a lot of people. But it's not like, oh, you can't come and watch my stuff, or, oh, you can't, Like, these are people who are so incensed by their political opponents that they're saying, no, it's not enough that they exist. We can't have them a part of anything that we do. That's not good business sense. You don't build an audience by driving people away because they have a difference in political philosophy. Oh, they voted for somebody you don't like? Well, we don't want them working for you. That's what happened with the whole Comicsgate thing. That's how people got driven out of DC and Marvel. We don't like the way that you voted or what you express on Twitter, so we're going to kick you out of the company. Regardless of your talent, regardless of what you've contributed to us in the past, we're going to get rid of you. And plenty of industries have done this, and now they're left with people who are only ideological. They're not concerned about the industries that they're actually in, and that's a major problem. That is a huge problem. And it's only going to get worse. When you make comics where you make Wonder Woman basically fight your political enemies, you're not doing anything to make those people want to read your comics. You're telling those people, please don't read our comics. We hate you. And they go, oh, you hate me? Okay, well, I won't give you my money then. That's counterproductive to anything that I want to do. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. Just make stuff that people want to read. But that's the other sort of hidden secret here, is that the creativity is not there. The creativity isn't there to create something that everybody can enjoy. It's just, we want to make propaganda for our own ideologies. That's all. That's all we know how to do, so that's all we're going to do. We don't know how to make things that are authentically neutral and enjoyed by broad audience. Broad audience appeal seems to be a word that doesn't come up in a lot of these boardroom meetings anymore. Broad audience appeal, where is it? Why is it here? It's just, I don't know, it's nuts. It's nuts. It's ridiculous. You know, there's the incident here. Numerous comic professionals support artist Jamil Igle ending his professional business relationship with former DC publisher Dan DiDio for doing an interview with John Delarose. This is a bit of an older story, but I mean, for crying out loud, he did an interview with somebody that this artist doesn't like, and so he blacklisted him. That is unbelievably petty. That is unbelievably petty. You can have all the disagreements you want. You're cutting people off who were otherwise your friends because they spoke to somebody you don't like. They did an interview with somebody you don't like. Children engage in this type of behavior. Actual children. These are full-grown adults. Artist Jamal Igle, who worked on a number of DC titles such as Supergirl, The Ray, Firestorm, and others, recently announced he's ended his relationship with former DC publisher Dan DiDio after he did an interview with John Delarose, and he's receiving praise and support from a number of comic book professionals. DiDio did an interview with John Delarose earlier this week to promote his Ancient Enemies comic book series. He also discussed his current gripes with the comic book industry, as well as explaining why woke ideology is rampant in comics. Igle reacted to DiDio doing the interview with Delarose on his Facebook account, where he posted, quote, "I just unfriended an ex-employer for crossing a line they can never come back from." The line is talking to somebody who you may not like. Once you cross that Comicsgate line, we're done professionally and personally. Oh. So just to summarize, he did an interview. The former editor-in-chief of DC Comics did an interview with somebody that this artist didn't like, and he unfriended him. And now they've gone on a tirade against this guy because he did one interview. What is this? I have no words. I have no words for this type of behavior. Look, if you don't like somebody, you don't like their philosophy, you can either try to make inroads or you can just silently choose not to interact with people. This whole campaign of trying to publicly lambast people is just ridiculous. As one said the other day, this isn't what people of eras like the civil rights would want. If Dr. King was still alive in 2023, he would be shunned for being about togetherness and togetherness and not division. Not this division. Exactly. Dr. King, it's been pointed out multiple times, Dr. King would be absolutely eviscerated today, because if he was to call for any form of togetherness, then he would just be destroyed. Because he wasn't calling for division. He was calling for unity. Now, his private life is a little bit different. There's a little bit more of a different thing going on there. I kind of actually lost respect for a lot of his things. It was a situation of not practicing what he preached. That's all I'll say about that. But his overall message, everybody agrees with. It's just I don't know that he personally preached that in a lot of his life. So that's another discussion for another day. But regardless, the problem here is you've got people who are so incensed that somebody doesn't share their exact ideological viewpoint that they're willing to publicly declare that they're basically blacklisting them, unfriending them on Facebook. I want nothing to do with them. Publicly trying to shame them. Oh, you're part of Comicsgate, which is just a movement of independent comic creators that were kicked out of the industry doing their own thing. They're doing fine. It's not ideological. They want to make more neutral comic books the way they used to be made. And that has incensed all of the people who want to make comic books about them and their ideology. This is getting so wildly out of control. And here's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is eventually that tide is going to turn. And you're going to see people coming out of the woodwork saying, oh, we were never about all this ideology stuff. We never were for this ideology stuff. We never supported it. We never stood behind it. It was always just terrible. We never liked it. Keep receipts, people, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to disavow all of it because it will be advantageous for them to do so. Meanwhile, they pushed division on top of division on top of division. And I keep saying to myself, what happened? What on earth happened to the people who were concerned with things like IP protection in companies? When an IP actually meant something, so you don't mess with an IP to suit an ideology, that IP is established as this thing, we must stay in line with this thing. What happened to the people who are responsible for that in these corporations? I can't understand that. What happened to the very concept of IP protection seems to have gone out the window. And that's especially true with comics. It's also true with games. It's true with Hollywood. I've talked about all of this. It's just completely gone. And I don't understand it. It's just nuts. I can't. I don't know. There's not a whole lot of articles to read here. But my point being, this stuff is getting absurd. The culture war is getting absurd because it's getting petty. Adults know how to get along, or at least should know how to get along, but they're acting like children. You can have your ideology, they can have their ideology, you can meet in the middle. There's going to be division points, but you can meet in the middle, and that very concept was taught to me ever since I was a kid. There are going to be people who don't agree with your point of view. There are going to be people who don't agree with what it is that you're doing. That doesn't mean that it has to be World War III. I don't like the idea that it has to be World War III all the time. Oh, we have to kick these people out of the company. We have to make sure that these people can never work again. They can never be paid again because they're quite literally the definition of evil. Just because they're your ideological opponents doesn't mean they want you destroyed. But I've seen that kind of rhetoric from all of these industries. And from people within all of these industries, to the point where people want nothing to do with these industries anymore. It's absolutely absurd. It really is. You know, it just... I don't know. It's all tiring. It's just tiring. Let's see. Is there anything else here? Seems to be just more of the usual stuff from celebrities complaining and... Let's see. Ahsoka finale is a nonstop train of contradictions and stupidity. I have heard nothing good from the Ahsoka thing because it's just more of... It's not only that it's ideological, it's that it's incoherent. It's such a wildly incoherent story. And with Star Wars, that you don't do that. Star Wars needs good storytelling. If you don't have good storytelling in Star Wars ain't going to do nothing. Star Wars is going to fail. People are going to walk away because there is a standard of quality expected from the original trilogy, the prequels, and so on and so forth. Until, of course, you get to Disney Star Wars, which I already talked about earlier. Then there's Castlevania Nocturne. And it's just, that's a whole mess because it's more ideology over substance. And, oh, boy. It is just tiresome. Let me see what else I can find. Let me bounce over to Bleeding Fool for a minute and see what they got. Because they have some different articles. Universal Monster Film Ranking, that could be interesting. Blumhouse CEO confirms Spawn reboot film to debut in 2025. That'd be different. Studio Ghibli, Japanese animation shop to be sold to Nippon TV. Well, that's actually kind of big. It's actually really big. The UK Guardian reports anime director Hayao Miyazaki's studio, Ghibli, will be sold to or Ghibli, depending on who you asked, will be sold to the majority ownership of Nippon TV after his son decided not to try and run the company himself. Following his dad's presumed retirement after making what will be presumably his last production, The Boy and the Heron. That's gonna be emotional. Weeks after the celebrated Japanese animator Hayao Miyazaki made his long-awaited comeback, the studio he founded almost 4 decades ago has secured its long-term future, easing concerns over its struggle to find a successor. Studio Ghibli said this week that the company would be acquired by the private broadcaster Nippon TV, which promised to continue building on Ghibli's global success. Miyazaki, widely considered to be one of the world's greatest animators, absolutely earned that. Founded Studio Ghibli in 1985, leading it to a string of successes, including an Oscar in 2003 for Spirited Away. The studio built a loyal following around the world with films like My Neighbor Totoro and Princess Mononoke, while Miyazaki was nominated for 2 further Academy Awards for Howl's Moving Castle in 2006 and The Wind Rises in 2014, the same year he was chosen to receive an honorary Oscar. As I've mentioned once before, his previous film, The Wind Rises, glossed over the life of an aviation engineer who built the fighter plane models Japan Imperial Army used during World War II. But with all the leftists running the now irrelevant Oscars, no surprise they'd give him a prize he doesn't deserve. The agreement with Nippon TV, which will become Ghibli's biggest shareholder, came after Miyazaki, 82. Wow, he's 82. What a long and storied life. He's 82. And his president, 75-year-old Toshio Suzuki, failed to persuade Miyazaki's son to take over the running of the studio. We have long struggled with the question, who will be the successor? Studio Ghibli said in a joint statement with Nippon TV. Now, I don't know if Miyazaki's son is actually an artist, but if he is, that's a lot to take on. I don't think people understand that. If you're taking on an entire studio, there's going to be stress on top of stress that comes with that. It's a shame he has to sell it. But, I mean, just having his son take over by virtue of being his son doesn't really mean much of anything if he's not a businessman, if he's not an artist, that sort of thing. So, that couldn't have been easy. Miyazaki's son Goro has repeatedly been mentioned as a possible successor, but has firmly rejected this idea, the statement said. It is too much to shoulder by myself. Exactly. He's saying it himself. Shoulder by myself. It is better to leave it to somebody else. Goro, an anime director, said, according to the statement. So he is involved in the industry, so he's not totally a stranger to it, but he doesn't want the pressure. I don't blame him. I honestly don't blame him. He should at least get a say in what happens going forward based on his father's legacy should something happen to his father, because, he's 82 years old. Sounds like Miyazaki Sr. is the only justification for the studio's existence. Ghibli may continue under its own name while Nippon TV retains new ownership, but it wouldn't be surprising if it becomes even less stellar than it was when Miyazaki Sr. was in charge. And while some of his films are impressive, it's a terrible shame he soured the bitter impact with his own leftist politics. Without him, it'll probably become just like any other studio, assuming it continues much longer. When did that happen? It's a terrible shame he soured the bitter impact with his own leftist politics. When on earth did that happen? For now, if Miyazaki is really retiring, it's possibly for the best. I'm gonna look that up. I didn't know that he was engaging in that sort of ideology. That is odd. I thought he was largely an apolitical figure. Go figure. Oh, go figure. Like I said before, nothing is truly neutral. Even creators, and his ideology doesn't take away from his brilliance. Those Miyazaki films are some of the most beautiful animations ever put to film since ever. The amount of detail and emotional, just moving scenes, and it's all breathtaking. It really is. Yeah, it's a bit absurd and a bit odd in terms of storytelling, but it is a visual treat. Any Miyazaki film, it truly is. I need to watch more of them. In fact, there's a lot of them I have not seen. In fact, I think I've only ever seen one. But let's see what else is going on. Disney live-action Bambi remake to tone down death elements. Oh yeah, I forgot about this. I forgot about this. Okay, let's hear it. Disney's ambition to modernize all of their classic animated films continued unabated. Their next victim is Bambi, and news has come out that the studio is planning to potentially downplay Bambi's mother's tragic death. That was a pivotal part in the movie. What is wrong with these people? I mean, are we that soft? I mean, it was a tragic, and if you were a kid, it might have been a little traumatizing, but, I mean, you're a kid. The news has generated a reaction against the company's woke crusade to interfere with its iconic pictures. Exactly. You're messing with something that isn't broken. You can argue that it's controversial that the mom was shot and killed. But you want to know something else? In the real world, unfortunately, things like that happen. It's not just in the animal kingdom. Stuff like that happens in the real world. People lose parents to murder, to accidents, to all sorts of things at a young age, and that's realistic. And another parent has to shoulder the burden. That's what happened in the first Bambi. Dad had to pick up the burden. The king of the forest had to raise Bambi for the rest of his life. And that's exactly what happened. But I have a feeling they have a problem with that too. That's too traditional, I suppose. Lindsay Anderson Beer, the screenwriter, recently told Collider that she is working on a script for a live-action remake of the animated 1942 film for a more modern audience to make it more, quote, relatable to 21st century children. And she is looking at how the beloved original animated classic dealt with the death of Bambi's mother. Quote, not to spoil the plot, but there's a treatment of the mom dying that I think some parents these days are more sensitive about than they were in the past. And I think that's one of the reasons that they haven't shown it to their children, she says. There's a lot of presumption there. She's just assuming that parents won't show their kids Bambi because the mother dies. Fans of the classic animated motion picture were quick to respond to the, quote, modern approach. A modernized Bambi? Pretty sure that story would still work today just as it is. Exactly. It's a timeless classic. Does that mean nothing to these people? Timeless classic. Yes, that was probably a controversial scene even back in 1942. You don't think in 1942 audiences weren't shocked by that? Of course they were. It still won awards. It was still a fantastic movie. I wonder what this means, modernized retelling. They gonna change Bambi to a moose instead? Oh, boy. Bambi is the child of a drug lord named Dirbo Escobar. I try to stay off of Twitter, but sometimes people are just, they just go crazy. The Walt Disney Company is churning out live-action remakes of popular animated films from its intellectual property treasure chest. While few achieved box office success, The Lion King, Aladdin, and Beauty and the Beast, more recent efforts have been made massive flops. Pinocchio, despite featuring Tom Hanks, performed poorly with fans and reviewers, as did Disney's version of The Little Mermaid, portrayed by black actress Halle Bailey, or Hal Bailey. Yeah, Halle Bailey, I think that's how you say it. Which, coincidentally, the studio altered the motivation of the protagonist by removing the in love with the prince aspects completely. They ruined that entire movie. They made it about, it's what I said earlier, they made it about what they wanted it to be as opposed to what audiences were expecting and liked. This whole notion of modernization. A remake of Bambi. How do you remake a movie about a talking fawn who grows up to be a deer? That's another good question. Well, I think what they'll do is they'll CGI, they'll make everything all realistic, and they'll basically retell. They're going to zero in on the musical aspects like the first movie. They had all those musical segments, which honestly weren't my favorite, but that whole movie was made to showcase animation. That is like Fantasia. Though Disney made those types of movies to showcase what they could do with animation. That's part of their draw. So remaking it makes no sense because the whole point of Disney's classic movies is to showcase what they could do with animation. They were doing things with animation that had never been done before. And most people don't talk about this, and I'm surprised they don't. But the way that Disney did these movies was he gave them, look at Fantasia, look at the visual sequences in that movie. Those were made to show off what they could do, to showcase that the medium was a serious medium. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You're just retelling the same story that's already been told. Nobody's asking for it to be retold. But Disney is doing this, and the main reason they're doing this is to be able to keep the IP. They don't want to lose the IP. They already lost Winnie the Pooh. But they're doing this to basically keep the IP going and ensure that they can do whatever they want with it in the future. But I mean, the original is a classic. I mean, just look at the way they hand painted these cells. You can see the hand painted background. They hand drew Bambi's mother and him, and it's beautiful. It holds up today. Animation isn't a genre; it's a medium that can be used to tell stories that can't be done in live action. Exactly. I agree. I absolutely agree. It is a tale as old as time. 90s Disney. Yeah, Beauty and the Beast. But I mean, you look at what Disney was able to do versus what they're probably going to do, which this is just a picture of a regular fawn, but they're going to try to make it look CG and realistic like they did with The Lion King, and it's going to be an absolute mess. There's no reason for this to be made other than it's just going to be for the sake of maintaining the IP. And so, because they think that everything that came out prior to the 21st century was terrible, they're going to tone down all the elements that made the original classic, all of the sensibilities that they think are quote unquote outdated, and that's just going to be what happens. A tale as short as a TikTok short, modern Disney, absolutely, 100%. That's just it. Whenever you try to modernize something, you completely misunderstand the whole purpose of why that thing exists. You completely misunderstand what made it popular, what gave it an established audience, and you write off the idea that there are any modern fans of these things. And you think that everything has to be modernized. And that's ridiculous. That it doesn't. Not everything has to be modernized. Some things can be left alone and just showcased as they are and be passed down through the generations, but that doesn't exist anymore. It just doesn't exist anymore. It's so tiresome because it's the same playbook over again. Then whenever they get criticized, it's the same criticisms every single time. All right, what else is there? Sorry, if I want CGI, I'll call Andrew Brenner. That man was a master in his time as showrunner for Thomas the Tank Engine. That's why we love the Renaissance. Yeah, that stuff was amazing. For what they were able to do at that time, that was amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But we live in this weird time where everything has to be modernized, and that includes the look. The look is dated. And I just pointed out, they have that still, let me see if I can get back to it, from Bambi. That still alone is a work of art. You could put that up on a wall. You could put this on a wall in somebody's house and they'd be like, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. And when you see the sequence when they show the mother moving her head and moving around, it looks like a real deer. And that was what amazed audiences, how realistic it looked, despite the fact that it was a hand-drawn animation. And they're removing all of that because they don't do hand-drawn anymore. Or they don't, it's all CG, so it's not on cells. This was done on cells. This was a painted cell and drawn on and painted and inked on. This was gorgeous. But they don't do that anymore because, well, number one, because they're explosive, but number two, it's time-consuming, it's money-consuming. This was a part of the film's appeal. Redoing it in CG does nothing. It does nothing, absolutely nothing. It looks natural and organic, exactly. It looks natural and organic, and it looks beautiful. That's why you watch classic Disney films. They're relaxing. They've got a nice view to them. I don't like every Disney classic animated film, but I can appreciate the artistry in almost all of them. I really can. Even if the stories aren't that great, I can appreciate the artistry and knowing that Disney and his animators worked their butts off to bring the public something that they had never really had before. They were groundbreaking. Disney isn't doing groundbreaking things anymore. And that's part of what's killing the company outside of all the ideology and just bad decisions and driving away all of their classic fans in the pursuit of modernization. You got to spend money to make money. Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of people are not doing that. IDW Media still hemorrhaging money. Lost $1.28 million last quarter. IDW is not doing well. Which is sad because I really liked The Last Ronin. I thought that was a really good comic, but they really didn't lean into that. According to reporting by ICV2 Comics, publisher and media company IDW by ICV2, excuse me. Comics publisher and media company IDW continues losing staggering amounts of money in 2023. The publishing division reported a deficit of $1.28 million for the third quarter of its fiscal year that it concluded on July 31st, 2023. This was due to a challenging combination of reduced revenues and higher expenses. The deficit was significantly lower than both the $200,000 loss in the most recent quarter and the $595,000 loss in the corresponding quarter a year ago. But this time, all the money lost can be placed squarely on their comics division, IDW Publishing. IDW Publishing sales of $6.25 million were down $300,000 from the year ago quarter, which the company attributed to a decline of $1.167 million in book market revenue due to fewer releases in 2023, and smaller decreases in licensing and royalty and in digital sales, partially offset by a jump of $932,000 in direct marketing revenue for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Lost Years, plus similar increases in direct-to-consumer sales and book market allowances and returns. Modernization, come on, Hollywood, it doesn't work. In other attempts, coughs, PSR, coughs. If it doesn't work in freight rail, it makes you think it'll work in entertainment. Exactly. Modernization is just a catch-all term they like to use for whenever they want to go out of their way to make changes that nobody asked for and nobody needed. It's a blanket term, but then they try to justify it, and then when it doesn't work, they silently are like, well, we're still committed. That, like the whole mess you mentioned with PSR. Well, we're still committed to the system, even though it's causing a lot more derailments of trains, and because we are, creating more difficult times for our crews. They can't actually be home and take sick days and all of that nonsense. It's just corporate nonsense. It's just being disconnected from the consumer. It's absolutely crazy. But in summary, IDW they keep losing money, but they're doubling down on what people don't want. The best thing that they have done has been The Last Ronin, and I did a review of The Last Ronin on my comics series that I do on here, and I said it was one of the best books I've read in a long time, and I don't usually read Ninja Turtles. I've read classic Ninja Turtles, but modern Ninja Turtles I usually don't touch. But The Last Ronin is such a fantastic miniseries because it was done by the original creators. They brought on good artists. They had good storytelling. It didn't have any hint of any sort of ideology. It was just a good future what-if scenario for the Ninja Turtles, and it was one that was emotional and action-packed, and it just worked. They did everything that they should have with that series, and it unfortunately didn't really lead to much. There's a director's cut, and then they set it up for a sequel to the Ninja Turtles, which I have zero faith in. Just no. And that's just it with IDW. They don't particularly care. Same with DC, same with Marvel, same with Dark Horse, and I don't know about Image. Image is still doing Spawn. I think Spawn is doing okay, but I think Image is a bit of a mixed bag. I haven't heard too much about Image Comics, to be honest with you, but the independent scene is what people need to be paying attention to because they're making the stories that people want to read. And they're all not paying attention. They really aren't. They're not paying any attention. And that's crazy. Indie Comics Showcase 242. I have to check that out. 241. They've got a whole bunch of indie showcases. I need to read a whole bunch of these. But I think I'm going to do that on my own time. Anyways, I think I'm going to wrap up tonight, folks, and see if I can't figure out what some of the connection interruptions were about. And I'm pretty sure I just ran out of stuff to talk about, too, as well. So hopefully I'll be able to do this again next week with a little bit more planning. This was very last minute of me, but it is what it is. I enjoyed the time tonight. It's been a whole lot of fun, and I will see you guys during the next one. I'll read this last comment here. And if the rumors are to be believed, I believe Joe Henrik wants to end PSR at CSX, saying he wants to improve his railroad's relationship with the public, customers, and employees. Yeah, a lot of railroads are going to start dumping PSR. 100%. They're going to they're going to get rid of it. They can't keep it. The derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. It's just, what more can you say? PSR led to that. almost definitively PSR led to that. So you can't keep doing PSR. But that's a whole nother topic for another day. But anyways, thank you folks very much for watching. I will see you guys in upcoming videos and hopefully next week during a stream. This has been Super Koopa TV. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.